Hey, welcome back to Joyboy Solar. This is FDR here. Gonna go ahead and walk you through how electricity works, or rather how you're getting your electricity now compared to how you would be getting it if you had solar. That way you can visually see the difference between the two. Now, do keep in mind that this is geared towards Florida, and it's not an exact, how electricity works or anything like that, but it's a brief overview so you can get kind of the gist of it. Now, it all starts with the power plant. Now, in the state of Florida, FPL owns the power plants, so these might as well be one thing. But for the purposes of this, sometimes the power plant can be different from the utility company, so we'll just keep it that way for now. So, it starts with the power plant. This is where the electricity gets produced. Now, utility companies, like I mentioned before, are not government agencies. So they still need to generate a profit. They need to make money, meaning that however much it costs the power plant to produce the electricity, the utility company is going to sell it to you for more than what it costs them to produce, right? Basic economics. But that does mean you do get a markup. Now, once a power plant funnels the electricity to FPL, the distributor, they go ahead and they distribute the electricity. However, in order to get the electricity from them to you, we need infrastructure. Now, this comes in the form of power lines and things of that nature. However, power lines are old. Some of them been up since World War II. It costs a lot of money to repair. I don't know if you know any linemen, but they get paid very handsomely because they have a very dangerous job. So, that being said, good for them. However, the cost of that maintenance does get passed on to you, the consumer. So you pay a markup on the electricity. You also pay a markup on the infrastructure and the maintenance. Now, this is considered the cost of doing business. It's not anything too outrageous. However, FPL has this nasty habit of being greedy, and they charge you not only for the electricity and for the infrastructure, but they also charge you a delivery fee. So just the mere act of delivering you the electricity, they actually charge you for that, which is pretty ridiculous. Now, this is how you get your electricity now. As you can see, from point A to point C, there's a lot of markups on that journey. Now, when you decide that you want to go solar, it's a very simple solution. You no longer need the power plant because you are the power plant. You don't need FPL anymore because you don't need to send the electricity anywhere, right? You produce it at home and you use it at home. Now, when you install the panels on your roof, as so, you have the sun beaming on the roof, generating electricity. The electricity that you generate is in the form of what's called a direct current, right? Directly from the sun. So this form of current is too strong for anything in your house to use. So it needs to be converted into an alternating current using what's called an inverter. Now, the reason that I bring up this inverter is because this is a very, 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 very important part of the solar system, but not often talked about and usually forgotten about. Okay. Now, when you use electricity in your house right now, you have what's called a meter on the side of your house, and that meter goes up and up and up as you use electricity. Kind of like the odometer on your car. That's how the utility company knows how much to charge you. Now, one of the biggest questions that I get is what happens when it's a, cloudy day? What happens when it's raining? Am I gonna lose production? Am I gonna, not make electricity? Like, what's gonna happen? Am I gonna just not have electricity when it's a cloudy day? And the answer to that is no. You will still be generating electricity. You will be fine. Clouds and rain are not too big of factors when it comes to your production, especially here in the state of Florida. Um, because the solar panels, or rather, the solar panels that any company that's worth their salt is using, should use UV to generate electricity as well, not just sunlight or heat, but the UV rays, taking full advantage of the sun. So depending on the company and the product that you go with, typically that's not really too much of a factor. Now, the inverters. The reason that I bring up those inverters is because back when solar was first starting, the inverters that were common and really the only inverters that existed were called a string inverter. Now, a string inverter was really awesome because it let you use direct current as alternating current, and therefore you could use solar energy. It was, at the time, revolutionary. However, that doesn't mean that it was perfect, okay? And I want to be very clear about that. When you had string inverters, you were required to have a really big box on the side of your house with all the inverters, and then they would connect to your solar panels, which to a lot of people is, hideous, ugly box on the side of the house. A lot of people didn't want to do it. But really, the biggest problem was this. String inverters were good in the sense that they let you use electricity from the sun. However, the problem was that if one of the inverters or one of the panels died, it would cause all of the other panels and inverters to stop working, meaning that you would lose 100% of the electricity you were making. So this means that what? Now you have two bills. You have a solar bill, you're paying for your solar panels every month, but now that your solar panels didn't work for 1 or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on how long all of them were out, now you have an FPL bill or a utility company bill for the energy that you got that the panels were no longer able to produce. So personally speaking, if you are working with any company that is still using a string inverter, you run away because they are cutting costs every which way just to get you to say yes. And they are probably charging you a super high interest. So low price, but with a high interest so that they're still getting their money's worth. It's just not worth it. Now, technology has progressed pretty rapidly. So you no longer are stuck with a string inverter, right? You have options. So another option, and the more popular option, and you'll see most companies using this, is a micro inverter. Now, as the name suggests, it's micro as in a small little inverter. So you actually no longer have this issue of an ugly box because the inverters will actually fit underneath the panels, which is nice. From a cosmetic, point of view. In terms of functionality, however, the real advancement here is that instead of working like the old Christmas lights where if one goes out, they all go out, they work like the new Christmas lights. So if one inverter or one panel dies, you're fine. Your other panels are still producing electricity. Now, yes, you did lose 25% of your electricity, but this means that you're going to get your solar bill and maybe a $10, $20 bill from your utility company, which is a far cry from getting a utility bill, full utility bill, and a full solar bill, which is ridiculous and defeats the entire purpose of going solar. But that is a micro inverter. Now, the best option on the market currently as technology stands and is commercially available is what's called an optimizer. Now, an optimizer works very similarly, almost identically to a micro, where they're small, so it works, underneath the panels, so you don't have to worry about the ugly box. If one panel dies, all the panels continue to work. Awesome. But this is the really cool part. So all of these panels are actually hooked up and linked together to a computer chip, and that computer chip will actually be able to tell all the other panels and inverters when one of them has died, and will increase the efficiency so that you are not losing any electricity. Essentially, the remaining panels will pick up the slack for any of the panels that have died. Okay? And what people always tell me, well, if the panels can just crank up the efficiency to make up for a dead panel, why aren't they just running at a higher efficiency all the time? Well, it's for the same reason you don't run anything 100% at 100% at all times of every day of every minute, it'll burn out. Your panels and most panels run at a 76% efficiency. That means the day they get installed, fresh, new, clean, everything working perfectly, they're only working at a 76% efficiency. Because if they work at 100% efficiency, instead of lasting you 50 years, they're only going to last you 20 years. You see what I'm saying? So most panels run at a 76% efficiency. However, when you have an optimizer, it gets cranked to 100% temporarily, so that you don't use any electricity until the panels get fixed, which is the crucial part here. Now, as discussed in some of my previous videos, some of the problems with solar companies. And one of the problems is workmanship or quality of product, which is what we're talking about directly here. Now, most companies, if they are still offering a string or a microinverter, will typically offer you a 10-year, sometimes 15-year warranty. However, the lifespan of most of these of the inverters specifically actually is about 12 to 15 years, meaning that the warranty expires as soon as you can expect to be running into issues. This is because it's, number one, cheaper to sell to you. It's easier for them to sell you a cheap string inverter and then charge you way more money to get it fixed later than it is to sell you something that's not going to break, so they're not going to make money on it later, and it's a higher price tag, so it's going to be harder to sell it to you. That's why a lot of companies do this. Yes, number one is because they only care about profit, but number two, it's, a lot of people are price sensitive, so they'll take the lower price even if it means that they're going to have problems later. But then when they have the problems later, they complain. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to make a decision. What's important to you? A higher price or a lower cost, right? And so when we take a look at why a company would choose one of these two, it's money. Money is the reason. Now, when it comes to a optimizer, yes, it is more expensive than a micro or a string inverter. That's literally a given since it's newer, better technology. However, it also means that it breaks down on you less. It also means that you don't have as many issues. It also means that most companies that use optimizers will offer you a 20 to a 25-year warranty on the panels and the inverter, which is a whole extra 10 years. 10, whole 10 extra years of warranty and peace of mind. So, you have to ask yourself, if you got to choose the company, you got to choose the product, what would you prefer to use? An optimizer, a micro, or a string? Personally, I like to get the best of the best, even if it costs me a little bit up front. But that's just the type of person I am. Now, this is another area where it's going to depend on the company that you're working with. Okay, now batteries. Okay, batteries, I really only ever recommend going batteries if you're going completely off the grid. If it's legal and possible for you to go completely off the grid. Okay. Now, in the state of Florida, it's actually very, very difficult to go off the grid completely because you need permission from the county, and most people are not going to be getting that permission. So it depends on where you live if you can go fully off the grid. So the difference between on and off completely is this. If you have a completely off the grid system, then you need to have batteries, okay? Because at night, there's no sun, so you're not making electricity. So you need to make more electricity during the day than you're going to be using at night. So you need a place to store that electricity. Ergo, you need a battery. So typically you would have a battery installed. During the day, you would make energy. Anything that you don't use gets put into the battery. And then at night, you use whatever was left in that battery. And that's how solar works completely off the grid. However, if you are not completely off the grid because of X, Y, and Z, maybe your company or the state or the city just doesn't allow it, then your second option is to be partially tied to the grid, which still has its benefits and drawbacks. Now, if you are connected to the grid, but you have solar power, the way it works is this. During the day, all the extra electricity that you make actually gets sent back to FPL and they give you credit for it. Then at night, you pull the energy back and you use up those credits. So you either buy a battery and keep it in your house, or you use FPL as your battery bank, as a bank essentially for your electricity, and then you withdraw the electricity back out at the end of the day. Now, I personally recommend doing it tied to the grid. And the reason is this. If for whatever reason there's any issue with your solar panels, if you're still tied to the grid, then you won't have a hiccup in your electricity. However, this does mean that if there's a hiccup in the grid, then you can't use it the way you would if you were off the grid. And what I mean is this. I want to try to make it simple because I know it can get a little confusing. If you have your own battery and a hurricane comes and the electricity goes out, then you will be able to recharge your battery during the day using your solar energy and use it at night, and you will be fully self-sufficient. However, if your panels stop working or are not collecting electricity, then you will have no electricity at all, or whatever is left in that battery. And you cannot pull from the grid. Now, if you're connected to the grid still, then if a hurricane comes and knocks down the power lines, even if you have solar panels, your panels will automatically turn off, because we cannot have your roof generating electricity and sending it to the grid and then people working on the lines, because they might get electrocuted and hurt themselves. So it's impossible. You can't do it. So if a hurricane comes and you still have solar panels, but you're connected to the grid, you still will not have electricity. Okay? I want to be very clear about that. Now, yes, you could be connected to the grid and have a battery, but at that point, that's just a waste of money. And to be honest, I would say stay tied to the grid, just because battery technology has not progressed to the point where I would comfortably say, yeah, go get a battery. Because number one, they're all lithium batteries. Even the best battery, the Tesla batteries, are all lithium batteries. They don't last very long. They don't last very long in hot, humid climates. You have to make sure that they're well stored, because if they're not, that's a fire hazard and very dangerous. You have to pay for the maintenance, because if you don't, again, it could be very dangerous. The technology just simply isn't there for batteries. However, if you're wholeheartedly, like if you need that battery and you are capable of going off the grid completely, then go ahead. That's perfectly fine. But for most people, you will still be tied to the grid some way, shape, or form. And I know that's a big turnoff for a lot of people, but realistically speaking, are you really going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars on a battery that's only going to last you maybe 5 or 10 years to only give you electricity for 1 or 2 days? Because most people get their electricity back up within a week or 2 weeks. And a battery will not last you that long either way during that scenario. But anyway, sorry to get lost in the weeds. But that's essentially the difference between on the grid and off the grid completely. There are pros and cons to one or the other. Again, in the description down below, in the questionnaire, I ask you which one you have your heart set on, and I'll do the research to see if you will be able to go off the grid. Because again, in some states, some counties can't do it. And that's on purpose. Utility companies actually have a lot of laws passed to inhibit your ability to go completely off the grid, because they do not want you generating your own electricity and then maybe selling it, because then they lose business. So if you have any questions, I hope you learned how solar works. This is the gist of the mechanics behind it all. I will make some frequently asked question videos that have more detailed responses to some questions that you might have had during this video. But this is typically how solar works. So stay happy, stay healthy. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.